And welcome back to the Credit Authority again. I am your host, Rhonda Kulch, and I appreciate you staying tuned in to our wonderful show. We always want to start by thanking our sponsors, so thank you to Equity First. If you are experiencing credit and or financial challenges, feel free to reach out to any one of their trained professionals at area code 631-714-4822. They are bilingual and nationwide, and they are looking forward to giving you the answers to your questions. And when we're speaking about credit and financial challenges, I'm so excited to have our next guest in studio. We have attorney Dennis McGrath joining us today. And Dennis specializes in the real estate market and foreclosure defense market. How are you?
Yes, good morning, Rhonda. Thank you for having me back.
I love when you get to come in. Of course, I love to see you outside the studio, but inside the studio, I get this time to really utilize your knowledge to educate the people that are tuned into our show. So let's start with the importance of having a really good real estate attorney.
Well, Rhonda, when it comes to real estate, a lot of attorneys can do real estate closings, whether you're purchasing a house, say, or selling it, purchasing or selling a co-op or a condo. Each one of them has their own challenges. The thing is, just because an attorney knows how to do it doesn't mean they should be doing it. And that's where problems come in that a lot of people have a friend of a friend or a relative who's an attorney, and they say, "Can you do a real estate closing?" And they say, "Absolutely, I can." Doesn't mean they're experienced on it. Let me give you an example. Recently, I sent out a contract on a sale to another attorney who I found out happened to be a friend of a friend. And they weren't a real estate attorney. So when it came to the negotiation of the contract, they looked at it and said, "Oh, this contract looks fine," and sent it back to me with the signatures on it. And I never in my career have had that, in that an attorney looks at a contract and doesn't change it. So that's where my client ended up getting all the provisions that we wanted in there without even having to go into a negotiation. So that's why you have to be careful on this.
And not that you're intentionally not disclosing or intentionally not offering something for your client, but from the sounds of it, there could be things that could have been detrimental to not necessarily this transaction, but a transaction if you're not reading the language correctly.
Well, that is correct. And we never put anything in there that happens to be untoward or unethical for that matter. It just happens to be things such as, removal of liens against a property and how much money the seller would need to expend in order to remove a lien. And that's a negotiating point that we might put down there, that they would only have to expend up to $1,000 in order to remove a lien, and the other attorney might want $5,000 on that. But if they don't question it, it's stuck at $1,000, and the buyer is now stuck with that provision within the contract, which is really favoring my client.
We had a client that we were working with recently, and what seemed to have been a very friendly contract between both parties of the buyer and seller has now gotten, we'll say, a little ugly, because the seller of the home had judgments and liens, exactly what you're mentioning right now. And because there was no specific provision, the purchase price would needed to have been increased because the seller didn't have the financial capability of coming to the table with additional money.
Well, that's also, though, when you're speaking about the difference in the valuation of the house. When attorneys do real estate contracts, there's a standard contract that is generally used. But if you're a real estate attorney, you don't just rely on that contract. There's something called a rider to the contract. It's just a separate contract that says this is going to be the ruling provisions if it conflicts with your other contract. And I don't mean to be boring about it on here, but that's where we put in those provisions with protections, because the regular contract isn't going to speak about the appraised value. The regular contract is not going to speak about the fact that you ended up getting a company to grieve your taxes, and once you've sold that house, who's responsible to pay for that? So there are things like that you end up putting in there, and if you don't, it could end up being the subject of litigation down the road. And some attorneys, again, if you're not a real estate attorney, some real estate attorneys do litigation, others don't. Our firm does. So if you get into trouble with that, generally other attorneys will know that you will litigate this case down the road for them. So So it's important on both ends of this.
And which I appreciate. Now, let's flip it over to the foreclosure side. We're starting to see, as we know, the courts have been opened. We have a lot of landlords that are still fighting to get their, tenants evicted. There's a lot of people right now that are in default.
That's correct.
How are you working through those challenges with the let's just start with the landlords. How are you working through the challenges with people that are landlords that have been catastrophically devastated over the fact that our government allowed people to stay in houses without having to pay?
It's unfortunate that there are programs. Well, I can't say unfortunate that there are programs, but there are programs that are protecting the tenants on this and that are trying to get money back to the landlords. Problem is that the protections have really, for lack of a better word, I don't want to be indelicate about it, but let's just say the landlords weren't taken care of on this.
No.
At the end of the day, when we have the foreclosures going on this, and so people can understand the scope of this, about a year ago, in a 3-month period, we had in Nassau and Suffolk maybe 30 foreclosures that had been initiated. Now, in this past 3-month period, I believe we got the listing of around 1,500. So it's catapulted on that. But what's important on this is when you've got the litigation real estate attorney, they're understanding what's happening in this foreclosure process, and it's allowing them to help you better navigate that in order to save the house. Or if you're not looking to save the house because you're too far behind on this, keeping you in there for as long as you possibly can.
And creating some sort of an exit plan.
Well, the exit strategy is always part of the program on that, because if you don't want a sheriff showing up at your door one day and saying, get out. What a good thing is, if you've got a litigation attorney who knows foreclosure defense, you might be able to either do a short sale where at that point you set the date that you're going to be removed from this house, and they forgive any money that you owe to the bank. So if the house is worth $500,000, but you owe $700,000, we can get that $200,000 forgiven for you. And on the flip side, we might even be able to get you some money, some moving money, in order to move on that. But the preferable route on this is to save you or save the house and allow you to stay in there. And we have ways of doing that now also with loans where what would they call back-end balloons on this, where they put a bunch of the money onto the back end. So after 30 years, we refinance this, and after 30 years, that money is owed, but you're not paying the money on it right now, and it allows you to remain in that house while you're paying the mortgage. So as long as the bank has a performing loan, as long as you're continuing to pay it, they're happy to allow you to stay in there.
Which makes sense. You're creating opportunities for families that generally have had some sort of a financial challenge.
Absolutely. And our goal on this is to make you whole. It's not to... There are sad stories. I can't say that every story always has a happy ending, because there are some people that want to remain in their homes, and for reasons, whether it be their finances, their lack of ability to make a mortgage payment, or the amount of money that's due on it, you can't always have a happy ending on this. But at least we can make this path clearer for them. And when you know what's going to happen, it's always easier to deal with something than the uncertainty of thinking that somebody might knock on your door one day and say, okay, here's a moving truck, you're about to be taken out.
And I think setting the clear expectation up front is so important. I know we have that on our side with our clients that come in, because there's so many emotions that are going on at any one point in time that they think they remember having a conversation about something, but they don't necessarily know where they are in the process.
Well, that's right. And the thing is also, they have conversations with the bank, with the representative of the bank, and the bank is not always looking out for their best interest. I can't say isn't always looking out. The bank is looking out for their own interest.
Yeah.
So while that conversation might have happened just as the client remembers, the bank is not going to remember it in that manner. So you really do need somebody to protect you on this. Right now, though, we're seeing that a lot of banks, because they're of a ruling that came out about a year ago named Kessler. The ruling basically says the manner in which the bank has to notify you prior to a foreclosure has to contain only specific language in it. And if there's other language in there, that case can be thrown out. So we're finding now that the banks are catching on to the fact that they were getting their cases thrown out, and they're offering modifications to people that they generally wouldn't have before because they have to start from zero again if the attorney that you've retained has been putting Kessler motions out there. So it's
So finding a smart attorney,
exactly.
not just any attorney, but the right attorney and a smart attorney that stays on top of what's happening in the market is important. So Dennis, if somebody wants to, reach out to you, unfortunately there are clients, right, that are in foreclosure or they're facing foreclosure, or perhaps maybe they're just 1 or 2 months behind and they have questions, or they're looking to buy or sell. How do they reach out to you?
They could always call me directly. My number goes to my cell phone, so you will always get me. It's 516-500-7711, or visit me on my website. It's www.gomklaw.com.
You heard it here, so stay tuned. We have our final guest coming up.